All right. Welcome back, everybody. I'm gonna get some water in me here. This is pretty warm out. Well, very warm out for that matter. That's good stuff. We're continuing reading Fairest. Hi, Bear. Oh, you need more water? Okay, hold up. There you go, baby. There you go, babies. Okay. Oh, all right. So back to Fairest. We're almost done with the book, I would say. So, continuing from where we left off. Where we left off, Channery got the idea that she's going to burn the child alive. So we continue from there. She stood in the doorway to the nursery, listening to the girls giggling in their playhouse. They had covered the top with blankets from Everett's bed for added privacy. Or privacy, I guess. From here, Levana could see intricate apple blossoms embroidered around the edges of one of the blankets, and it surprised her to think that no matter how many times she had slipped into Everett's bed, she had never noticed those designs. The blanket was not something commissioned for the palace, which meant Everett had brought this from his previous marriage, and had kept this secret part of Solstice hidden these past years. Realizing that she was fidgeting with her black wedding band, Levana let her hands fall to her sides. Inside the playhouse, Winter said something about being princesses in the tower, but then it all dissolved into childish nonsense and laughter that Levana couldn't follow. It would be over after today, and that knowledge was a relief. She could stop thinking about the princess that would one day grow up and take everything from her. She could stop being haunted by the ghost of her sister and the legacy she'd left behind. After today, all of Luna would be hers. It had occurred to her that she could choose not to take Winter away after all, and to let the fire claim them both. Then all of Everett would be hers too. But then she thought of what a hollowed-out shell of a man Everett had been in the months following his wife's death, and she couldn't stand to watch that again. Oh, pardon me, are you... Levana turned, and the girl drew back with a gasp before falling into a hasty curtsy. Forgive me, your majesty, I didn't recognize you. The girl was no great beauty, with limp hair and a nose too large for her face, but there was a delicateness to her that Levana thought could appeal to some, and a grace in her curtsy that befit someone who had been hired to raise their next queen. You must be the new nanny, said Levana. Yes, my queen. It is a great honor to be in your presence. I am not the queen, said Levana, tasting her own bitterness. I am merely watching over the throne until my niece is older. Oh, yes, of course. I meant no disrespect, your highness. The giggling had stopped. When Levana glanced toward the playhouse, she saw that the girls had pulled back the blankets and were watching with curious eyes and open mouths. Winter is being seen by Dr. Elliot today, said Levana. I've come to take her. The nanny stayed in her curtsy, uncertain if she was allowed to rise and look upon Levana or not. It was obvious from the stretched thin silence that she wanted to ask why the queen would bother when it was within the nanny's own duties to make sure the girls made their appointments, or why the doctor didn't come to see the princess here in the nursery. But she didn't argue. Of course she didn't. Winter, come along, Levana called. The blanket fell again, hiding the princesses. You have an appointment with Dr. Elliot. Let's not keep her waiting. Oh, so, yeah. It's Darnell is the guy, and Elliot's the, yeah. Shall I expect the princess's return this afternoon, your highness? Asked the nanny. Levana's gut tightened. No, I will take her back to our private quarters after the appointment. She watched as Winter climbed down the ladder, graceful in the way that only a 4-year-old child could be, even with her chubby legs and a very full skirt. Her hair bounced as she dropped to the floor. The blanket shifted again, Celine peering out from the gap. Levana met her stare, and she could sense the distrust from the child. The instinctual dislike. Jaw tightening, she sucked in a quick breath. I have a job for you. The nanny, growing uncomfortable, rose from the curtsy. For me, your highness? Do you have a family? Any children of your own? Oh, no, your highness. A husband? Or a lover? The girl flushed. She was probably no more than 15 herself, but that meant so little in Artemisia. No, I am not married, your highness. Levana nodded. Celine had no family, and neither did this girl. None that needed her, at least. It was perfect. It was meant to be. A hand slipped into Levana's, making her jump. "I'm ready to go, Mother," said Winter. Pulse thrumming, Levana yanked her hand away. "Go wait in the corridor. I'll be there in a moment." Crestfallen, Winter turned and waved at Celine. A tiny hand snaked out from beneath the blanket and waved back, before Winter floated out of the nursery. Now. She would do it now. After today, it would all be over. Levana pressed her hand against her skirt, wicking off her damp palms. "Go into the playhouse," she said, almost like she was speaking to herself. "Go be with the princess. It is almost time for her nap." She spoke slowly, impressing the idea into the nanny's mind. Reaching into a hidden pocket, she produced a candle, already half burned. "It will be dark under that blanket, so you will want this candle to see by. Set it out of the way so the princess doesn't accidentally burn herself. Near the edge of the playhouse, under that blanket. The one with the apple blossoms. You will stay with the girl until you both fall asleep. You are already tired. It will not take long." The nanny tilted her head to one side, like listening to a song that she couldn't quite place. Producing a tiny book of matches, Levana let the nanny hold the candle while she lit it. Oh, fuck, she's making the nanny kill them. Oh, that's terrible. Her hands trembled with the spark of the match, fear of the flame tensing every muscle. By the time the wick took light, she could feel the flame creeping up the little match, threatening to singe her fingers. Levana hastily shook it out, breathing easier the second the flame was extinguished. She dropped the smoldering match into the nanny's apron pocket. The girl said nothing. "Go now. The princess is waiting." Empty-eyed, the nanny turned and wandered toward the little playhouse, carrying the lit candle aloft. Celine was peering out again, confused and curious. Licking her lips, Levana forced herself to turn away. In the corridor, she grabbed Winter's hand without a word and tugged her toward the doctor's office. Her heart was pummeling against the inside of her chest. She had done it. She had done what she needed to do. Now she had only to wait. Of course, who was I to expect that Levana would do her own dirty work? Naturally, she was going to glamour someone else into doing it. It was more than an hour before Levana heard the first stirrings within the palace. Though her nerves were throbbing the entire time since she'd left the nursery, it had already begun to feel like a dream. Just another one of her fantasies, resulting in disappointment. While Dr. Elliot checked that Winter was as healthy as any child had ever been, Levana paced around the waiting room. The doctor's office was in the palace, a satellite office from the one she kept at the med center on the other side of the city, so that she could be on call at the slightest sign of a cough or fever from the royal family. Realizing that she was still holding the little book of matches, Levana checked that no one was around and dropped them into a trash bin, then wiped her hands on an upholstered chair as if the evidence might show itself on the ashen traces on her fingertips. "Doctor!" Levana jumped, spinning toward the office's open doorway. In the other room, Dr. Elliot's voice went quiet, and then she appeared holding a vital scanner in one hand. Behind her, Winter was sitting on a papered table, swinging her stockinged feet against the side. A servant appeared, face red and panting for breath. "Doctor, come quick!" "I beg your pardon. I am with Her Highness and—" "No, it's the nursery! Princess Celine!" The servant's voice pitched so high it cracked. So it should be more, "Princess Celine!" A chill rolled across Levana's skin, but she managed to maintain her baffled expression. "Whatever could be. There was a fire. Please, you have to come. There's no time to lose." Dr. Elliot hesitated, glancing at Levana, then back at Winter. Gulping, Levana took a step forward. "Well, of course, you must go. If our future queen is in danger, you must see to her at once." It was all the prompting the doctor needed. As she scooped up a medical bag, Levana turned to the servant. "What's happened? What about a fire?" "What about a fire?" "We're not sure, Your Highness. They were in the playhouse and it caught fire. We think they must have been sleeping." "They?" "The princess and her nanny." Gaze alighting on Winter, the servant suddenly started to sob. think the Stars Princess Winter wasn't there too. It's awful. Awful. It took only a few seconds for Levana to become annoyed with the servants' wails. Winter hopped down from the table and went to put on her shoes, but Levana grabbed her wrist and dragged her after the doctor. Not now, Winter. We'll come back for them. The doctor ran. Levana wanted to. Her curiosity was agony, all her fantasies accumulating in that breathless moment, but she didn't want to carry Winter, and princesses do not run. Future queens did not run. She was still gripping Winter's hand when she smelled the smoke, heard the screams, felt the pounding of footsteps reverberating through the floors. A crowd had gathered by the time they arrived, servants and guards and thaumaturges filling up the corridor. Winter! It was Everett, his face made of relief when he spotted his child. Shoving his way through the crowd, he stooped to lift Winter into his arms, squeezing her against him. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know. What happened? Said Levana, trying to push her way into the nursery. No, don't look. Don't go in there. It's horrible. I want to see, Papa. No, you don't, darling. No, you don't. Sweetheart. Levana bristled. Never did he call her that when they were in public, always hiding their relationship behind closed doors for fear of impropriety. He must have been truly shaken. He tried to grab her wrist, but she ripped her hand away. She had to see. She had to know. Move aside! She is my niece. Let me see her! The people listened. How could they not? Their faces drawn in horror, cloths pressed over their mouths to stifle the stench of smoke and coals, and she thought, certainly, that wasn't the smell of burning flesh, but it did have a familiar meatiness that turned her stomach. When finally she reached the front of the crowd, she paused, taking in the sight through a veil of smoke. Dr. Elliot was there. Elliot was there, along with countless guards, some still holding empty buckets that must have been used to put out the flames, others stamping out the remaining embers. The blanket was entirely gone, the playhouse reduced to a teetering wood structure. All blackened timbers and ashes. Scorch marks were left on the wallpaper and elaborate crown moldings. Through the clustered guards, Levana could make out two bodies on the playhouse's upper level. Obviously bodies, though from this distance they looked like little more than charred remains. Step back! Step away! Dr. Elliot screamed. Give me room to look at her! Give me space! You're not helping! Come away, Everett said behind her again. Shivering, Levana stepped back and dared to turn to face him. She didn't have to fake the shock. The sight of it was 1,000 times more terrifying than her imagination had given her, 1,000 times more real. She had done this. Those bodies were her fault. Celine was dead. Though Everett was still holding Winter against his hip and trying to block her view with his hands, Levana could see the girl craning her head to see the commotion and the chaos, the burned remains of her playhouse and her only cousin. Come away, Everett said again. He took Levana's hand and she allowed him to guide her. Her thoughts were a daze as they made their way back through the corridors. Her stomach was writhing with 100 emotions she couldn't have named. Winter's questions started coming in force. What happened, Papa? Where was Celine? What's going on? Why does it smell like that? She went largely ignored, answered only by kisses pressed against her thick curls. She is dead, Levana murmured. It's horrible, said Everett. A horrible, horrible accident. Yes, a horrible accident. Levana's grip tightened around his hand. And now, you understand? This means I will be the queen. Everett glanced at her, his face full of sorrow as he scooped his free arm around her shoulder and pulled her against him. He pressed a kiss against the top of her head, then two. You don't need to think about that now, sweetheart. But he was wrong, as the knots in her stomach began to slowly loosen. It was all she could think of. She was the queen. The guilt and the horror and the memory of that awful smell might stay with her forever. But she was the queen. Why are you digging a hole, baby? My dogs are digging a little hole behind at the base of the tree here. I'm surprised that Everett didn't think, like, you should be in shock. Well, I guess he's in shock right now, too, but Everett's going to think about that. Like, why was your first instinct, pretty much the first thing you said after seeing the bodies was, now I'm going to be queen. Levana basically outed herself with that. What's curious, though, Celine is dead. But we know she's not dead because Cinder is Celine. According to Dr. Erland, anyway. Cinder doesn't have any burn marks, but she's missing parts of her body, which we know were replaced with cybernetics, or robotics, when she was kept in stasis on Earth. When they were repairing parts of her body, perhaps necrosis set in and they had to take the arm and the leg. But then did they skin graft to make everything else work? But skin grafts leave marks. Skin grafts leave pieces. It's never fully returned. There's a bird on the light post on the other side of the street over there. I'm getting the creeping sensation that Cinder isn't Celine, but someone that was chosen to be Celine. Princess Celine was pronounced dead that evening. Levana made the announcement to the people of the from the palace's broadcast center. The video showed pictures of the young princess while Levana struggled to keep her voice somber, even while her nerves tingled from success. It was not happiness. She was very sad to know that victory had required such an appalling act. But success was success. Victory was victory. She had done it, and now, as the country mourned, she would be the one to lift them out of this tragedy. Little Celine, barely 3 years old, would hardly even make a blip in their history. The memory of their little princess would be entirely eclipsed with the reign of Queen Levana, the fairest queen that Luna had ever known. For once she was satisfied. She had Everett, she had her crown. She did not yet have an heir, but now that she was the last of the royal bloodline, surely fate would smile on even this request. She was all that was left. Not having a child of her own was not an option. After all, Winter couldn't grow up to be queen. No, Levana would have a child. With Celine gone, these were the new thoughts that engulfed her. How she would be a great ruler, and how the people would love her with all their hearts, and how, when Levana finally gave Everett a child of their own, he too would love her, finally, even more than his daring solstice. She was making the life she'd always wanted for herself, and she was close to it now, so very, very close. But only a week had gone by when Levana began to notice the change. The way people dropped their eyes when she walked past, not with normal respect, but something akin to fear. Perhaps she was imagining it. Perhaps even disgust. Perhaps was she imagining it? Perhaps even disgust. The way there was a new coldness from the palace servants, how they all seemed to be biting their tongues, wanting to say something but daring not to. The way that Everett asked her one night why she had gone to get Winter that day, why she had brought it on herself to take Winter to the doctor's appointment when clearly it was something the nanny was capable of. "What do you mean?" Levana asked, her heart in her throat. "She's my daughter, and I hardly get to spend time with her these days. Why shouldn't I take her to her appointments?" "It's just," she tensed. "It's just what?" "Nothing. It's nothing. I don't know what I was thinking." He kissed her, and that was the last that was said of it. But all this she could have ignored. Let them think she was guilty. Let them accuse her behind closed doors. As the Queen of Luna and the only royal descendant of the Blackburn bloodline, no one would dare accuse her to her face. No, it was another rumor that chilled Levana to her core. They were saying that Celine had survived. It was not possible. It could not be possible. She had seen the body, smelled the charred flesh, witnessed the aftermath of the fire. A tiny toddler could not have lived through that. She was dead. She was gone. It was over. So why did she go on haunting Levana this way? I hope you know that you are not in any trouble, said Levana. I only want to make sure I know the complete truth. Dr. Elliot stood before her in the center of the throne room. Normally this was the type of proceeding that would be dealt with in front of the entire court, but without knowing what exactly the doctor knew, Levana trusted very few people to listen to her testimony. She had even left her personal guards to wait in the corridor. For the last person she wanted to receive an account of this meeting was Everett, and even the highly trained guards were not impervious to spreading gossip. So it was only her, seated on her throne, and her trusted head thaumaturge, Sybil Mira, standing to the side with her hands tucked into the sleeves of her stark white coat. I have told you everything I know, my queen, said Dr. Elliot. Yes, but there are rumors. I'm sure you've heard them. Rumors that say Princess Celine may have survived the fire? That you, as the first person to inspect the bodies, might have some information about what was found in the fire that you have chosen to keep hidden. I'm so sorry. I would hide nothing from you, my queen. She inhaled a patient breath. She was my niece, Doctor. I deserve to know the truth. If she is still alive, it would pain me very much to think that anyone would withhold that information from me. You know that I loved her as if she were my own. Dr. Elliot pressed her lips, the look brief yet intense. I am sure, she said, enunciating carefully, that it would mean a great deal to you had the princess survived, my queen. But when I saw the body after the fire, I'm afraid that she was already lost. There was no saving her. No saving her? Levana leaned forward. So you're saying that she wasn't dead yet? The doctor hesitated. There was a faint heartbeat. This was mentioned in my report, Your Majesty. But while there was still some life in her when I arrived, she died shortly thereafter. I was there myself when the heartbeat stopped. She was dead. Levana gripped the arm of her throne. And where was that? When her heartbeat stopped, was she still in the nursery? Yes, my queen. And was there anyone else there to witness it? Anyone who could vouch for your story? Dr. Elliot opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. Yes, my queen. By that time, Dr. Logan Tanner had arrived as well, having rushed over from the med center. Levana lifted an eyebrow. Dr. Logan Tanner. I have not spoken to him. All due respect, my queen. I'm sure you have more pressing matters than conducting your own investigation into this tragic incident. Dr. Tanner will not give you any more information than I already have. As you said, I was the first to see the princess's body. I can tell you with absolute certainty that she is dead. Staring at the doctor, Levana could feel the woman's smugness rolling off her. She seemed anxious, but also confident. She knew more than she was saying, and the knowledge of this itched beneath Levana's skin. All due respect, Levana said, feeling the words slithering in her mouth, blah, blah, blah. There was no more pressing matter than if my niece, our future queen, is alive. If this is true, and you chose to keep this information from me, you understand that it would be a high offense. It would be cause enough to have you tried as a traitor to the crown. The doctor's smugness faded. She dipped her head. I'm sorry if I've caused any offense, my queen. I did not mean to negate your concern over these rumors. It's only that I can tell you nothing more than I already have. I certainly wish that there were substance to these rumors, that our dear princess had survived the fire, but I'm afraid it simply isn't true. Lavanna leaned back into her throne, her fingers gripping the thick, carved arms. Finally, she nodded. I believe you, and I apologize for this added inconvenience, Dr. Elliot. You have certainly been a loyal subject for many years, and that has not gone unnoticed. Dr. Elliot bowed. Thank you, my queen. Lavanna dismissed the doctor and waited until the massive doors had shut behind her before speaking again. Do you think she is lying, Sybil? I'm afraid I do, my queen. There was something in her air that I find distrustful. I agree. What can we do about it? Sybil came to stand in front of the throne. It is essential that we uncover the truth of the aftermath of the fire. If Her Highness is alive, it is your right to know, as both our queen and the child's only relative. Otherwise, how else can you possibly seek to protect her from further harm? Sybil's gray eyes glinted when she said protect, and Lavanna suspected that her head thaumaturge might know exactly why Lavanna was so set on finding out whether or not Celine was alive. But she also didn't think Sybil was too bothered by the truth. After all, Lavanna was the one who had raised her to her current position, bypassing several candidates with more experience. Some days she wondered if Sybil was the only person in her entourage who was truly loyal to her. Dr. Elliot seems to be under the impression that my interest in Celine's welfare is not born out of loving concern. How can I know that she is telling us everything when she seems set on keeping something hidden? Sybil smiled. We thaumaturges are trained with certain methods of extracting information, even those unwilling to give it. Perhaps Dr. Elliot and I should have a more private conversation. Lavanna stared at her, wondering if she wanted to know what these extraction techniques might consist of, but almost as quickly recognized that she would go to any lengths to find out the truth of her niece and what had happened in the nursery that day. Besides, Sybil herself didn't seem opposed. Yes, she said, sitting taller. I think that is a necessary course of action, Sybil, though I fear other people on staff wouldn't be as understanding. We will make them understand. After all, it is rather peculiar that Dr. Elliot was the first trained doctor to reach the child, and yet she wasn't able to rescue the girl, even after finding a heartbeat. The grounds for suspicion are obvious. It only makes sense that we would further investigate this matter. Feeling her anxiety start to ease, Lavanna nodded. You are entirely correct. She dug her fingernail into the carved ornamentation of the throne. And once we have learned all that we can from Dr. Elliot, I think it will benefit us to talk to this Logan Tanner as well. I want to know everything about the results of that fire. Sybil bowed. I will see that it is done, my queen. Dr. Elliot was taken into custody the next day for further questioning. Lavanna waited for Sybil's reports, having no interest in the details, but day after day passed in which the doctor had told them nothing of value. Then, 2 weeks later... Yeah, that works. Lena, get back here. Don't bother people. Then, 2 weeks later, before Lavanna could find a way to question the second doctor, this Logan Tanner, without raising further suspicion, he disappeared. So, Logan Tanner, as we know, is the one who got with Scarlett's grandmère and then had the kid, and then the kid was the dad of Scarlett, who was abducted by the Wolfman and then tortured and then released and then killed. So Logan Tanner as we know, was part of the conspiracy, or believed conspiracy, for getting Celine out of there. So Celine is alive. Good. Levana refused to be haunted by the ghosts of dead children and sisters, princesses and queens. In the year following Celine's death, she leaped into her role as the new true Queen of Luna. She continued to strengthen the army, allocating as many resources as she could allow the scientists to perfect the bioengineering process. The first group of soldiers began their training, and they were even more miraculous than Levana could have imagined. Half man, half beast, all brutality and viciousness. Levana made it her duty to become well acquainted with the surgeries and training of the soldiers. It was a beautiful sight when the first boys emerged from their suspended animation tanks, still dazed and awkward with their new instincts and mutated bodies, and hungry. They awoke so very, very hungry. She came to know the research team well, headed by the infamous Sage Darnell. Though Levana was not as impressed with the old man as she'd expected to be after hearing of his genius for so many years. When she met him for the first time, she could think only of how this man had fathered a shell, and it took all her willpower to listen to his unenthusiastic explanations of the surgical procedures without making snide comments on his worthless offspring. Meanwhile, the first carriers of the disease were sent to Earth. Levana had heard years before her parents' reign that some of the citizens of the outer sectors would find ways to steal away in diplomatic or reconnaissance vessels heading to Earth, or pay what they could afford to persuade a supply pilot to whisk them away, leaving their life of labor behind. It was a selfishness that Levana couldn't fathom, to think that any of her people would consider only themselves and abandon the country that needed them. Yeah, it's that exact thinking that is why people are leaving, Levana. Her parents had always turned a blind eye to these fugitives, perhaps not understanding that their society would crumble fast if they could not hold on to their limited labor supply. But now Levana had a use for these runaways. As the strain of the disease was slipped into the outer sectors, each lunar gradually became an unknown carrier, and their own immunity would mean they had no idea they carried within their bodies a lethal disease. It wasn't long before the first case of the disease was reported on Earth, in a tiny oasis town off the Sahara. It spread quickly from there, raging through the Earthen Union like a wildfire. Though the Earthens hastened to set up quarantines for the sick, it was impossible to keep it contained when the secret carriers, the hapless lunars, stayed so well disguised in their midst. They called the disease letumosis, from the ancient language meaning death and annihilation, a fitting name as no one who caught the disease survived. Levana and her court called it a success. She didn't know how long it would take to weaken the Earthens. Years, perhaps even decades, before the disease became the pandemic Levana envisioned. But she was already anticipating the time when she would swoop in and offer them an antidote. She was already dreaming of how the leaders of Earth would prostrate themselves before her. In their desperation, she would offer anything, any resource. They would offer her anything, any resource, any land, any alliance. She would try to be patient, knowing that the day would come. She would try to ignore the pessimistic mutterings of her advisors and their reports that claimed all of the new labor initiatives she'd put in place were unsustainable. She would not back down now. Everything was going according to plan. All that was required was patience. Nearly 15 months had passed since Celine's death when Levana was told that Dr. Sage Darnell, head of the bioengineering team, had disappeared as well. Suicide, some suspected, although a body was never found. Many believed that he never recovered from the birth and death of his shelled daughter. Yet another talented scientist gone. But when Levana was informed that this would not halt the production of the soldiers, and that all surgeries would continue as scheduled, she forgot about the old man and his pathetic life entirely. The years passed, her legacy grew. The rumors of Princess Celine began to fade. Finally, Levana had everything she wanted. Almost everything she wanted. Still hasn't had a kid. Which sucks for Levana. She must be infertile. Unable to bear a child. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just trying to pet you. I'm sorry. Levana stood on the palace's lawn, watching as Everett chased Winter and Jason around the lakeshore. She had finally relented to Everett's friendship with Garrison and his family, and now they were a permanent fixture in her life, despite how much she wished Everett would befriend some of the court families. The boy must have been 11 now, a couple years older than Winter, slender as a twig and still as pale as the white sand he trampled on. He and the princess, to Levana's dismay, seemed to have formed an inseparable attachment. For her part, Princess Winter was growing up to be as beautiful as a love-sung lullaby. Her skin, a few shades lighter than Everett's, was velvet soft. Her hair had grown into thick curls, tight as springs and glossy as high-polished ebony wood. She had her mother's eyes, caramel, but with flecks of gray and emerald taken from her father. Baba, you're so cute. You're cute, dog. Whispers were beginning to circulate. Whereas before, members of the court had mocked the idea of marrying a princess who was nothing more than a guard's child. Now moods were changing. Though still only a child, her beauty was becoming impossible to ignore. Such a child would no doubt grow up to be a stunning woman, and the families were taking notice. Levana knew that this would benefit her someday. Her stepdaughter would be an ideal bargaining chip should the need for an alliance arise. And yet, the first time she overheard talk of how the princess might someday be even more fair to look on than the queen herself, Levana's thoughts had surged with hatred. Oh, hey, look, it's Snow White. All right, we finally reached that point in the story. Levana had worked so hard to perfect her glamour, to be the most beautiful queen to ever sit on Luna's throne. More beautiful than her mother, more beautiful than Channery. No longer was she the ugly princess, the deformed child. The thought that Winter could so easily achieve what she worked so hard for churned in Levana's stomach. It did not help that Everett spoiled her mercilessly. They were never together for more than a moment before the dandy child was hoisted up on his shoulders or swung around like a spinning toy. Though Everett refused to ever dance with Levana at the royal balls, she had caught him teaching Winter what waltz steps he knew. His pockets seemed to always be full of those sour apple candies the princess was so fond of. And there's the poison apple. Good. Levana reached for her throat, wrapping the earth pendant up in her fist. There had been a time when Everett brought her gifts too. Down the shore, the children's laughter sparkled as bright as the sunlight on the lake's surface, and Everett laughed as much as any of them. Each note was a needle in Levana's heart, undoing her. There had also been a time when Everett would have asked her to join them, but it was not queen-like to run and laugh and roll around in the sand. After she had waved away his requests too many times, he stopped making them, and now she regretted every time she stood by and watched as Everett lifted a squealing Winter over his head, watched as Garrison's wife fixed them cheese sandwiches that were devoured as greedily as anything the royal chefs ever prepared, watched as Jason showed Winter how to build a sandcastle, and then how best to destroy it. This was a family, all of them, happy and carefree. And despite all her efforts, all her manipulations, Levana had never become a part of it. Sweetheart? She started, prying her attention away from the children to see Everett clomping toward her. His pants were soaked up to his knees and covered in white sparkling sand. He was as handsome as the first day she'd laid eyes on him, and she loved him every bit as much, knowing that made her feel as hollow inside as carved out wood. Is that the charm I gave you? He asked, his teeth glinting in a refreshing smile. It melted her and stung at the same time. Levana unclasped her hand. She hadn't realized that she was still gripping the old tarnished charm. I didn't even know you still had it, said Everett, reaching out for her. He looped a finger beneath the chain. The touch was brief and deliberate and made her dizzy with the same spark of yearning she'd felt as a teenager. Of course I still have it. It was the first gift you gave me. A shadow fell over his expression, one that she couldn't translate, something sad and distant. With a tap against her sternum, he let the charm go. Are you just going to stand here watching all day? He asked, eyes twinkling again. Maybe the shadow had only been her imagination. No, she said, unable to return more than a tired turn of her own lips. I was about to go inside. There's a new trade contract with TX-7 that I need to review. A trade contract? It can't wait until tomorrow? He cupped her face in his hands. You work too hard. A queen does not keep office hours, Everett. It is always a responsibility. His expression turned scolding. Even a queen has to relax sometime. Come on, come play. It won't hurt you. And no one would dare to criticize if they saw. He said it like a joke, but Levana thought for sure there was tension underlying it. What does that mean? You think that people are afraid of me? She pressed. So oppressed that they wouldn't dare say something out of favor? Is that it? His jaw worked for a moment, baffled before he set in frustration. People have always been afraid to speak out against the royal family. That's politics. It isn't something you alone can lay claim to. Huffing, Levana turned on her heel and started marching back toward the palace. With a groan, Everett chased after her. Stop it. Levana, you're overreacting. I didn't mean anything by it. You must think I'm an awful ruler. One of those spoiled, selfish queens who cares more of her own reputation than the welfare of the people. That's not what I think. You know I care about what the people think of you. But I also know you care about them in your own way. And what way is that? She snapped, ducking into the palace's overhang. Levana, would you stop? His hand encircled her wrist, but she yanked it away. Don't touch me! Immediately, the guards who were always in her periphery stepped forward, weapons at the ready. Everett halted, raising his hands to show he meant no harm, but his expression was furious, and Levana knew that his honor was the reputation he cared to protect. That he would not be happy if anyone dared start a rumor that he had threatened the queen, his wife, when she was the one who was being absurd. Overreacting. Fine, he said, taking a step back before turning away entirely. Go read your contract, Your Majesty. Levana watched his retreating back, her hands clenched into shaking fists, before she marched toward the main stairs. It felt like running away. It felt like giving up. When she reached her private solar, where she conducted most of her business, she sat down to review the trade contract, but immediately started to cry instead. She hadn't known the tears were coming until it was too late to stop them. She cried for the girl who had never belonged, a girl who tried so hard, harder than anyone else, and still never had anything to show for it. A girl who had been certain that Everett loved her and only her, and now she couldn't even remember what that certainty felt like. Despite every one of her weapons, the heart of Everett Hale remained unconquered. She wasn't even trying to get pregnant anymore, though she knew that couldn't last. It was only that for so long her visits to Everett's bedchambers had felt more exhaustive than passionate, more hopeless than anything. She cried because she could feel the gossip rustling through the court, her bareness a regular topic of closed-door conversations. Thaumaturges and family heads moved around the palace like pawns on a game board, forging alliances, plotting their moves should the throne ever be left without a suitable heir. She cried because there would be bloodshed and uprising should she fail. In the end, someone would place the crown on an undeserving head, and a new royal bloodline would begin. Levana hadn't the faintest idea who would fall and who wouldn't rise to take her place. She refused to give weight to those fears. The throne needed an heir, and she would be the one to produce it. The stars would smile on her eventually. They had to, for Luna's sake. But fate would be on her side only if she could prove that she was the only ruler this country needed. Luna was thriving. The city of Artemisia was more than a paradise now than it had ever been. All of the outer sectors were producing goods at rates never before seen, and whenever there were rumors of unrest, Levana had only to complete a tour through the domes to visit her people and remind them that they were happy, that they loved her, and they would work for her without complaint. Being among her people was as close to a family as she'd yet to find. The stronger Luna's economy grew, the more Levana wanted. She cried now because she wanted so very, very much. She wanted everything for her people. She wanted Earth. She needed Earth. All of it. Every mountain, every river, every canyon and glacier and sandy shore. Every city and every farm, every weak-minded earthen. Having control over the blue planet would solve all of her political problems. Luna's need for resources and land and a larger labor force. She did not want to go down in history as the fairest queen this little moon had ever known. She wanted to be known throughout history as the fairest queen of the galaxy. All of it. Every mountain, every river, every canyon and glacier and sandy shore, every city and every farm, every weak-minded earthen. Having control over the blue planet would solve all of her political problems. Luna's need for resources and land and a larger labor force. She did not want to go down in history as the fairest queen this little moon had ever known. She wanted to be known through history as the fairest queen of the galaxy, as the ruler who united Luna and Earth under one monarchy. Their yearning grew quietly at first, taking the place in her belly where a child should have been. It thrived somewhere so deep inside her, she hadn't even known it existed until one day she looked up at the planet hanging, mocking her, just out of reach, and she almost fell to her knees with the strength of her want. The more time that passed, the more that desire dug its talons into her. She deserved Earth. Luna deserved Earth. But despite all her plotting, all her long meetings spent discussing soldiers and plagues, she still wasn't sure how to take it. How much further do we have to go? Oh, we are very close to the end. How many pages is that? About 40 pages. We'll save the tantalizing end for the next one, as I have to get these dogs back inside. So Celine's alive. Though there's no reports of it being so, Levana knows somewhere that Celine's still alive. Jason and Winter are growing together as they grow up. Everett is being a loving, understanding husband, but Levana's being not an idiot, but she's just not seeing it. Of course, Everett also thinks that Levana killed the kid, so. But that was a real, lashing out from Levana that I think was unwarranted. And it's interesting to see that the guards were at the ready and had weapons drawn to take on Everett. But also, Everett should have seen that she didn't want to be touched. But also, Levana was being manic. He just wanted Levana to be part of the family. Couldn't even manage that, could she? And she has to have Earth. Letimosis is now on the planet, and they're waiting for it to spread like wildfire. She's getting the armies ready. I think the hints of Levana being crazy started when she started manipulating Everett. But I think it was solidified that she would go to any lengths to get what she wants when she tried to kill Celine. And I think it's reinforced as the years go on. Because she wants and wants, and that's the problem, is that she wants and wants. And doesn't understand that she can't always get what she wants. But she's a queen, and queens will do whatever they can to get what they want. But remember, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need. And what Levana needs is to be dethroned, so... See you on the next episode. Next time we finish Fairest.